so I'm not sure if that's going to, I haven't put the link in yet, so I'm sure no one will see anything, but just so you know.
Yeah, meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. So by staying in this meeting, you consent to being live streamed. Anyone with access to the live stream
I
can
haven't
watch
put
and share.
the link in yet, so I'm sure no one will see anything, but just so you know.
Yeah, meeting is now streaming live on YouTube.
Okay.
So by staying in this meeting, you consent to being live streamed. Anyone with access to the live stream can watch and share.
The link in yet, so I'm sure no one will see anything, but just so you know.
Yeah, meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. I
Okay.
just shut my camera off. So by staying in this meeting, you consent to being live streamed. Anyone with access to the live stream can watch.
The link in yet, so I'm sure no one will see anything, but just so you know.
Yeah, meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. I just shut my- So by staying in this meeting, you consent to being live streamed. Anyone with access to the live stream can watch.
The link in yet, so I'm sure no one will see anything, but
Live on YouTube. See anything on the live event?
whoever.
Yeah, and you can't join yet on Swoogo. Can you see anything on the live event?
Web address.
Yeah, and you can't join yet on Swoogo.
Yeah, I haven't put that in yet. I'm just doing that right now.
Anything on the live event?
Click. Web address.
Yeah, and you can't join yet on Swoogo.
Yeah, I haven't put that in yet. I'm just doing that right now.
Anything on the live event?
Click.
We are driving each other nuts, Mike.
I know.
Definition of insanity.
Web address.
Yeah, and you can't join yet on Swoogo.
Yeah, I haven't put that in yet. I'm just doing that right now. That's good times right there.
We are driving each other nuts, Mike.
I know.
Definition of insanity.
Web address.
Yeah, and you can't join yet on Swoogo.
Yeah, I haven't put that in yet. I'm just doing that. Click. That's good times right there.
We are driving each other nuts, Mike.
Details.
Definition of insanity.
What's up there? That's good times right there.
We are driving each other nuts, Mike. Definition of insanity.
What's up there? Click web address. Okay, I'm gonna do this the easy way. Okay, I'm gonna do this the easy way. Okay, I'm gonna do this the easy way. Okay,
Hey,
I'm going to send you the YouTube link. Can you upload it? Because it's not letting me.
yeah, send it over.
I'm gonna do this
Yeah.
way. Okay.
Hey,
I'm going to send you the YouTube link. Can you upload it? Because it's not letting me.
yeah, send it over. That's weird hearing it repeat back.
Yeah. So I'll get out of Swoogo.
Okay. And I just got your email. Okay, let me go right now.
Okay, you upload
Do
it.
you want me to
'cause
keep going
it's
through though?
not
Sure, yeah.
letting me. Just want to make sure it's working and yeah. So I'll get out of Sudo.
And I disagree. Hey, let me go right now.
Okay, upload it here. Sure, yeah. Just want to make sure it's working and yeah. So I'll get out of Sudo.
I'm gonna need a drink after this. That's all I know.
And I disagree. Hey, let me go right now.
Okay, upload it here. Sure, yeah.
Oh shit! Now we got.
It's working and yeah. I'll get it.
I'm gonna need a drink after this. That's all I know.
Okay.
Oh shit! Now we got.
Working and yeah. Got it.
I'm gonna need a drink after this. That's all I know.
Okay.
Oh shit! Now we got.
Working and got it.
I'm gonna need a drink after this. That's all I know.
Can you see it, Mike?
Can you guys see it? Should be up.
Okay.
Oh shit!
Just want to refresh the page if there.
I'm gonna need a drink after this. That's all I know.
Can you guys refresh your page and see?
Marty, you're gonna have to sign me in again here. It won't let me do it.
Page yet because it doesn't actually go live until 6:30.
Oh, okay.
Is it,
So do you want me to quickly just try putting it on there to see if it works?
Yeah. Can you guys refresh your page and see?
Marty, you're gonna have to sign me in again here. It won't let me do it.
Page yet because it doesn't actually go live until 6:30.
Not yet, Mikey. Is it,
So do you want me to?
Yeah, because the window's not open yet. Lou's just gonna check it. Can you guys refresh your
Okay, so now hit refresh.
Now hit refresh.
it won't.
Page yet because it doesn't actually go live until.
Not yet, Mikey. Is it,
Yeah, because the window's not open yet. Lou's
Chrome
check it.
Console what?
Can you guys refresh your
Okay,
page?
so now hit refresh.
Now hit refresh.
Capital G?
Page yet because it doesn't actually go live.
Not yet, Mikey. Is it
Yeah, because the window's not open yet. Lou's
Chrome
check it.
Console what? Am I-
Can you guys refresh your page?
So now hit refresh.
Now hit refresh.
Capital G?
Page yet because it doesn't go live.
Not yet, Mikey. Is it Chrome Console what? Am I- Okay, it's working now, I think, Mike.
Good, good. Okay, So-
There?
yeah, it's there.
Okay, I'm gonna switch it back to 6:30 then, okay?
I've lost audio to you.
Yeah, I'm just
Okay.
talking to you. So I'm good. You're up. You're good. I just cool.
Stay by my computer though, Mike, and let me know if everything's going okay at 6:30, okay?
I've lost audio to you.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks. Lou.
Okay,
Goodbye.
no problem.
Yeah, I'm just
Okay.
talking. Okay. You're up. You're good. I just cool.
Stay by my computer though, Mike, and let me know if everything's going okay at 6:30, okay?
I've lost audio to you.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks. Lou.
Okay,
Goodbye.
no problem.
Let's see. Yeah, I'm just talking. Okay. You're up. You're good. I just cool.
Stay by my computer though, Mike, and let me know if everything's going okay at 6:30, okay?
Lost audio to you.
Sounds good. Thanks. Lou.
No problem.
Okay, so can I send messages yet?
Yes, because I can see you and Mikey and Drayton.
Okay, they can, I think, see us, honey, but I'm not sure. And I should be able to send messages. Loading chat. Can you see the chat on your Sunny? I think 10 said you can see and hear me now. Hey, everybody, we're just figuring it out. 6 minutes. How we doing, Mikey?
Everything should be good to go in 2 minutes. We're up.
Okay,
We're live.
I just don't have a chat on the Swoogo. How we doing,
Oh.
Mikey?
Good. Let me get Lindsay.
Yep, just texted Des and Lindsay.
Everything should be good to go in 2 minutes. We're up.
I
We're
just
live.
I just don't have a chat on the Swoogo.
Hey, Jody's not getting a chat on Swoogo. Good. Let me get Lindsay.
Okay, I'm in there right now. There's a chat on the
Yep,
screen.
just texted Des and Lindsay.
Yeah, she says there's a chat on the screen, Jode.
Okay, maybe I just have to refresh. I'll try that again.
Just don't have a chat on the screen.
Hey, Jody's not getting a chat.
Yep, just texted Dave and Wendy.
Yeah, she says there's a chat on the screen.
It's not coming on. Is it coming on yours? Maybe I just have to refresh. I'll try that again. Not on mine.
Hey, Jody's not getting a chat.
Yep, just texted Dave and Wendy.
Yeah, she says there's a chat on the screen.
It's not coming on. Is it coming on yours? Again. Not on mine.
It's not coming on. Is it coming on yours?
Nothing still?
Not on my end. No. Can you see my face? And no face on Marty's.
It's 6:29 right now, so.
Okay, got it. I got it. Yep, so we'll wait for, not on my end, no, can you see my face? Oh, and no face on Marty's?
It's 6:29 right now, so.
There
Okay.
we go.
Got it.
I still don't see a chat, Mikey.
Oh, I see you too.
No face on Marty's.
Oh, there we go. I still don't see a chat, Mikey. Mari, you got a chat? Still no chat here, Mikey. You got a live feed, Marty? Okay. Let's give her. We're just going to figure out the chat part of it in a second because I can't see your faces or your voices. Let me see. Okay, everybody. Is it just me? Do you see? We okay, Marty?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay.
There's just no chat.
Yeah, we can deal. Hey! Welcome, everybody. I am so grateful that you're here. Oh, for Christ's
Is
sake.
it just?
PS. I'm still looking for a chat because normally I can see your chats. I can't just see them right now. But we're going to get started today. Thank you for joining us for our first ever 2023 workshop series. We started this in 2022. So my name is Dr. Jody Carrington. I'm a clinical psychologist. And we started talking about mental health related issues, just gathering together as a community, talking about different topics, many of which this community has suggested they'd like to hear more about. I am a registered clinical psychologist, but tonight isn't about therapy, it's about bringing you resources. And so the disclaimer is I'm so happy to answer questions and put you into in connection with resources and sort of provide some opportunities for you to learn more about, clinical issues that I think I just wish we would talk more about. So tonight is anxiety and depression. I'm going to talk for about an hour, and then we're going to jump into some questions. And so we do have a chat, which I'm hoping Marty can see right away and the team can see right away. But if not, you can always email us stuff as well. But I'm so excited to, as soon as we get this up, to be able to see your names. We had a resounding response to this one, which I'm very grateful for. And I'm going to tell you tonight, so I am currently sitting on Treaty 9 territory, which is in Timmins, Ontario. And everything that I create for you today happened on Treaty 7 territory, which is now known as the central part of the province of Alberta. It is made up of the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, and the Métis Nation Region 3. All of that is considered the Blackfoot Confederacy. And acknowledgement is certainly the underpinning of everything we're going to talk about tonight. But what I wanted to start with today is, so much of the time, I think we speak a lot about, depression, anxiety, very colloquially, and we don't really understand sometimes what that means. There's a big difference between, I think, talking about things from a clinical perspective and talking about things as from a colloquial perspective. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the definition of anxiety and depression, how they often overlap, how many of us feel depressed or sad or anxious or worried many times in our life. That's completely normal. What does it mean when it dips into the clinical range? And then also, what does it mean when I'm going to go over some of the diagnostic categories that I think people get kind of messed up a little bit. And then I'm going to end tonight with just a few suggestions about what we do if people we love are struggling significantly with mental health issues, if we are in that place as well. Okay, so thank you again for being here. This is such an honor for me to be able to talk about the things that I love and I'm so passionate about, because here is the statistics for sure that globally, we are now dying from emotional illness faster than we are dying from physical illness. And there is still such a significant stigma around having a physical disorder. People would absolutely, unequivocally desire to have something physically wrong with them than something emotionally wrong with them, which it is just mostly because it is so much more acceptable. If somebody you know is struggling with cancer versus somebody you know is struggling with schizophrenia, it becomes the unknown around mental health issues that I think leaves many of us in the dark, okay? And of course, the response often to a mental health issue is the necessity of relationship, of connection, of communication. But see, the issue is, unlike most physical conditions, there's no blood test historically for any significant mental health issue. We can't sort of say, this is what you have based on these things, right? Which is different, of course, than a physical condition. The lability of our emotions, the uncertainty, unpredictability of things like emotional dysregulation, not being able to see inside the brain, how much of this is a neurochemical response, how much is this genetically loaded, how much this is attention seeking, which if you follow me for long, you know I hate that word, but there is an underlying sense of when I'm emotionally dysregulated, I'm going to seek other people to walk me through it, okay? And so it becomes really tricky in this space, which is why I think I'm so passionate about it, to really understand what people need from us when they are struggling and why they can't just smarten up, use their words, make better choices, snap out of it, stop worrying, go for a run, drink your water, stop drinking, drink more, whatever the deal is. We like to make suggestions when people are really struggling in our world because it is so painful for us to watch, okay? So as I do, I think the preface of anything that I talk about around this world of mental health, and I wish I would have talked about this or learned about this earlier in my career, is the fundamental basis, of course, is the ability to stay emotionally regulated. When you are emotionally regulated, you have access to the best parts of yourself. When you're emotionally dysregulated, you lose access to the best parts of yourself. But I want to tell you, I mean, if you've read anything that I've written, I will tell you about the Dan Siegel sort of fundamental neurophysiology behind any big emotion, okay? So put your thumb in the middle, put your finger around that thumb, that's your brain. Okay, that's the hand model of your brain. This represents your spinal cord. This represents your brain stem. If you lift your fingers up, this is your limbic system. Your amygdala lives in there. All the really primitive parts of emotion live in there. How we deal with big emotions of the world primitively, almost instinctually, is fight, flight, and freeze. Okay, that lives in there. That's like sort of the primal brain. It was developed first. If we take us back thousands of years ago, this is basically what many species had to deal with, okay? Over the years, we've evolved as humans, and we've developed the prefrontal cortex that wraps around that. This has allowed us things like language and long-term memory and emotional language, empathy, kindness, compassion, and of course, sort of understanding the context of the world. Historically, when something was going to attack us, what our bodies would do, or what the bodies of more primitive primates would do, would be flipping whatever comes in this prefrontal cortex out of the way so that we can just get back to this most primitive place of fight, flight, or freeze, okay? When you're in that neurobiological state, what happens is your body is in a state of fear. It knows it needs to protect you. So if there's something that is sort of running out, or you're going to get attacked by a tiger, you do not need certain things in your body. All the blood is going to rush to the center. Sometimes you're going to get sweaty. It's going to be very difficult to think clearly, because any resource that you have is going to be pushed to the center of your body so that you could just go, okay? Or hide, okay? Or run. You need every experience in your body to sort of stay there. Okay, so primitively, our amygdala is the most sort of developed, the limbic system, the internal part of our brain. And truly, when you bring a baby home from the hospital, that's really what they go back to every time they get scared or they need something, is they go very much into that very primitive part of the brain. They lose their minds, they cry, they startle easily, they frighten easily, because they don't have a lot of opportunity yet in that prefrontal cortex to lean on things. And as time goes on, we develop that ability to sort of stay emotionally regulated. Now, sometimes what happens is this process of flipping your lid, of getting emotionally dysregulated, gets either because of a genetic condition, because of a neurobiological condition, because of an experience, or because of trauma, or sometimes because of a mixture of all of those things. Our body starts to respond to things as though there is an imminent danger, okay, even though it's not there. So when we, rightfully so, see a car accident and we get scared, we know we need to get our bodies out of the way because there's a sudden emergency happening. We do this and our body does what it's supposed to. Sometimes those get miscommunicated in the world of anxiety in particular, that we see things that make our bodies respond like that because of our experiences, or because of a miswiring, because of all of those things. So school, crowds, spiders, various things can make us go like this. And so our body says, we are in this state. And there really isn't anything, that sort of makes sense. So then we're confused by that. We know it doesn't make sense, but our body is the thing we tend to overwhelmingly respond to. So over time, what has happened for me, and I had a clinical advisor speak to this, to me about this one time. I want you to think about anxiety and depression on a bit of a spectrum, okay? So anxiety is a very active response to mood-related stuff, is to sort of the environment around us, okay? Your body tends to you have overwhelming worries of fear and nervousness and, okay? Which again, let me be clear, this is so normal. If we're in a new situation, if there's test anxiety, if we, are starting a new job, if we feel uncomfortable because we have to speak on a stage, I want your body to put itself in those situations, okay? Normal. Which is why there's a lot more, from a diagnostic perspective, a lot more leeway in the world of anxiety. What happens when your body is in a state of anxiety for a very long period of time? I want you to think about depression as much more of a flat response to the world. It's almost like we get overwhelmed by the world and our systems shut down, slow down, sort of sloggy mud kind of a feel, okay? So sometimes when the world gets so heavy, we get sad. Sometimes when we lose somebody we love, or there's a big transition in our life, we get sad. That is normal. Worrying about things and being sad about things. Context is a prerequisite to so many things. When I'm doing an assessment about whether somebody meets a clinical criteria for either anxiety or depression. Context matters so incredibly much, because we tend to over pathologize sometimes when people are really in a state of, they should be worried about this, or our kids should be anxious about this experience, their first sleepover, being away from mom and dad, going to university, not feeling competent, on a hockey team, whatever those things are like. So much of that is necessary, because there's no bad emotion. And I talk about this a little bit in Feeling Seen, but there really is. For a very long time, we have put a massive emphasis on people being calm and competent and feeling good, right? We just want our kids to be happy. We want our partners to be calm. We want to love our jobs. Everything. We're good. Stop being all, okay? But oftentimes what that does is it doesn't allow us to feel negative emotions. God, am I an asshole because I don't want to do this? Do I feel shitty because of this? What is wrong with me because of those things? And when we have nowhere to explore those sort of margins of emotion, we start to sort of then fight to stay in this place of content, happy, calm. We're doing all the resources and the breathing and the eating the kale and all the shit. But what it doesn't allow us is to process some of those emotions. Do I like school? Do I not like school? Why intuitively don't I like hanging out with these people? Why does this group of people make me nervous? What's the story in my head? I'm an incompetent public speaker, so I don't want to put myself in those positions. And every time I get in those positions, my body keeps the score. What is wrong? Oh my God, maybe there's some frightening thing that's going to kill me here. What undoes that often, right, is when we can talk about emotions. Now, oftentimes, we've lived in a society, a culture where we're so inclined to fix shit that we do not leave a lot of room to process it. Okay, so one of my biggest concerns around a strict behavioral model often, which we've all been raised in, I talk about this all the time. Kids should be seen in that. We don't want anybody to be distressed. We don't want kids to be sad when they lose. We don't want our partners to be unhappy. What do you need to do? Let's try this. Have you tried this? Have you done this? Right? We do this brutally in grief. It's okay. It's okay. At least. You're fine now. It's good. We're good. You're good. It's good. The intention's beautiful. Their perception isn't, particularly when there's things like anxiety and depression. So let's start there just a little bit. So I'm going to give you just the basic definition. Okay. So depression is sort of lingering, low, sad, or sort of a hopeless mood. The criteria for sort of being in that very clinical state. Now, let me tell you, there's a big difference. It's almost palpable. Somebody who's experienced a clinical mental health issue versus somebody who's just anxious or has some depressive symptoms. I will tell you, somebody who is clinically depressed it is debilitating. It is absolutely debilitating. Similarly, somebody with a clinical anxiety disorder, gosh, I can't tell you, it is like the questioning that happens in somebody's head when they enter into a clinical anxiety is almost indescribable, because there is such a doubt in everything. There's such a concern for other people's response. There's such a internalization of so many things. We lose access to content. We lose access to sort of reality because we're so overwhelmed by the nervousness and the fear. So you can see the difference. Depression is very sort of a flat response, and anxiety is a very active response. But here's what's interesting. There's a massive crossover between these two clinical diagnoses, or even these two experiences. So some of those things, like both irritability is a diagnostic criteria for both of those things. You will see sleep issues in both of them, sometimes appetite issues in both of them, energy level changes in both of them. And the idea of rumination, which is a sticky thought. So thoughts that you sort of just can't get away from, even though you kind of think you know, but it's not true. You ruminate, you get stuck in, you spin on, okay? So those are kind of the things where it kind of crossover. And people say to me, can you have anxiety and depression? Yes, some of the statistics are pretty clear. In a 12-month period, 48% of people have experienced, this is one of the a national mental health study, that, you can sort of go back and forth between the two of them. Very different than bipolar disorder that we're going to talk about in a minute. But I think sometimes you can report both of those symptoms, being very worried about things and then getting exhausted into this place of flatness, okay? Now, what I wanted to do, I think, is just sort of dive in a little bit. I'm going to see if I can share my screen with you. Mark, can you just ask Des or Mike if they can allow screen sharing? So I'm going to do that with you in a second as soon as we do this, but I want to just sort of, I think, dive in a little bit more around the depression part of things. And then I'm going to separate the two on a little screen for you so it's much more clear. Depression is much more, you know what, let's start with anxiety first of all. Again, when you think about sort of the most primitive parts of our brain responding to the world when there's danger is, I want the best parts of you to sort of shut down and us to worry about your safety. When we miscue whether there's a real danger and we start to worry about things that really aren't, there's much more leeway in this world of anxiety. In fact, you know, if we think about it from a clinical term, it's like, has it really impeded your functioning for 6 months or more? And we want to look at it's beyond worry about things. It's a fear about your health, your performance, your relationships, who you are as a person, a character. The more intense this gets, we start to worry about, are we this kind of person? Do we have these thoughts? Are we going to hurt our baby? Are we going to hurt other people? Maybe I am this. And so oftentimes the thoughts tend to be so debilitating that we don't even want to speak them, because we don't want people to feel bad about us. We don't want people to sort of, you know, have a different opinion about us. But we then also don't get to fact check that with anybody. Do you think I could actually hurt somebody? Do you think, you know, what do I think about, you know, these thoughts? And when it gets into the clinical realm of things, it starts to affect daily functioning, okay? So you can imagine that if the thoughts in your head are, am I going to hurt my kids? Would this world be better off without me? Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I have, you know, inappropriate sexual thoughts. This happens so often with adolescents. Concerns about religious beliefs. Is the world a real thing? Is this all fake? All of those kind of things sort of happen that can really make you question your sanity. It can really make you question all kinds of things. Are we good?
You just need to hit the 3 dots and say, make me a host, and Mike will approve it.
Okay. Hit what 3 dots? Sorry, team. We're going to look for 3 dots. Shit. I know what he means. I think I've seen it before, but I don't know. Oh, these 3 dots maybe? No. Okay. There we go. Rename. Blur my background. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to see how I can send this to us. Can't do it. Because we're on YouTube. Maybe. Okay, that's okay. No problem. You are the host now. Oh, son of a gun. Okay. Somebody found it. Okay, amazing. So this is what I wanted to show you first of all. Okay, so I'm gonna just do this real quick. Now, Marty, I want you to tell me as soon as you, if you can see that when it comes up on your screen. Because what I think we've talked a little bit about is emotions will not kill you, but not talking about them might. So here's, I think, the premise to everything that I really want to be clear about today. Anxiety, depression, those feelings in your body can be so debilitating. But oftentimes it is the processing of those things that becomes really critically important, okay? Now, when we talk about anxiety specifically, it is that sort of irritability, restlessness, stuck in a cycle, fear, very active things that start to debilitate our functioning, start to question our ability to stay sort of present and emotionally regulated out in the world. Depression, on the other hand, often is a much harder hit, and it is a flattening oftentimes. There's a loss of interest in things sometimes. Again, sleep issues across both of those things. Fixating on guilt happens, hopelessness, pessimism, anger, sometimes aches and pains happen. And I think what is interesting about these things is I just wanted to clarify a little bit. So I created this slide where we can talk a little bit about, depression-related diagnoses and anxiety-related diagnoses. So the DSM-5, I'm going to give some clarity around sort of actual clinical diagnoses. You can see I put some stars by some of these. But I want to start on the right side of this diagram and talk a little bit about anxiety-related diagnoses. And so generalized anxiety disorder is often the things that, so many people talk about, is like, I am just generally in this place of, it's always there. It's running my life. I'm worried about my friendships and my job and whether I'm a good enough mom, a good enough dad. I worry about what people are saying about me all the time. I'm often have a problem sort of just checking in with everything, which means my brain is active. I'm in this place of uncertainty and fear, and really I can't see any end in it. Every problem becomes a big issue. And you can imagine then how exhausting that becomes. So generalized anxiety disorder starts to really debilitate your life. It's got to be there for a few months in a row. It really, again, when I talk about this as a clinical diagnosis, I want you to be clear, there is such a debilitating factor to generalized anxiety disorder that just isn't there when you and I have bouts of worry, okay? I think the other thing that oftentimes gets talked about in this place is specific phobias. Now, if I were to want to treat something, I much prefer to have a conversation around a specific phobia. So it's clowns or flying or, something specifically that, heights that gets you in this place. And so oftentimes what happens is that there's a trigger there in some way, spiders, snakes, there's really common things around those experiences that then have triggered to the brain that this is absolutely debilitating. There is a connection between that trigger and your body's response to it that doesn't allow you to either engage or be around or be in a position where, you can handle that situation. And I think that when I think about specific phobias, it's actually some of the easiest to sort of understand anxiety around, because it is typically a non-threatening, in and of itself, it's a non-threatening entity, a clown, a snake, a spider. In and of itself, that simple thing cannot hurt you, right? But the associations that we've created with it, around it, for it, the context in which we've had those experiences, dogs, because somebody's been bit, like all of those things. And sometimes people are like, I just don't know why I freak out every time I see a clown. I just don't know why I have this specific phobia, which is part of, really being able to name it and work through those experiences and try to figure out sort of what is the why. And oftentimes the body keeps the score. There isn't like a specific thing that like, this is what happened. That doesn't necessarily need to be true. Some of those things can happen even outside of our knowledge. Okay. Again, I think part of it is, we're going to talk about what to do about it in a little bit. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Panic disorder, I wanted to just make a separate, have a bit of a separate conversation around that. So panic attacks are a thing that can exist without a generalized anxiety disorder. And here's the shitty thing about a panic disorder. It kicks your ass out of nowhere. So there are such things as nocturnal panic attacks. So you're sleeping, no trigger in the world. It sometimes can be triggered by a dream. But you wake up and you have as though you are in a jungle being chased by a tiger. So you can imagine how debilitating this is. Yeah, you wake up and you're sweating, your heart is pounding, you can't catch your breath. The world feels very dark. I will tell you from personal experience, a panic attack is the scariest thing because so much of the symptoms mimic a heart attack. So much of the symptoms mimic a significant physical response because your body is going into that place of heightened arousal. And so oftentimes what happens is, there is an emergency situation, you get checked out by a doctor, or you sometimes sort of can dissipate, sit in the panic, and it passes, which is the beautiful thing about a panic disorder. It will not stay forever. And convincing yourself of that during a panic attack is probably one of the hardest conversations you can ever have with anybody. But your body does not have the capacity to stay up like that for a very long period of time in that intense, highly intense space. And so what we're going to talk about is how we sort of dissipate that experiences so that your body can then follow. Okay. Social phobia is very interesting and one of my favorites, I think, because it is then really a specific fear of people, of being outside, of being around in big crowds. There's oftentimes a fear of, being sort of crushed by the crowd or judged by, or cannot get away, overwhelmed. And so that social phobia is something that I think is really, as you can imagine, so debilitating sometimes, can lead to things that we call agoraphobia, which is I'm scared then to leave my house because of the ramifications of what might happen. Okay. So those are sort of anxiety. You can see very active experiences in the world. Okay. Depression, on the other side of things, is much more of that flattened response. And so one of the things that I think people often talk about when they're talking about depression, in its truest, most debilitating clinical form, is a major clinical depression, which again, I will tell you, if you've ever known anybody with a major clinical depression, it is a flatness like you have never experienced. And it is like slogging through mud. It is like, you desperately don't want to be in that place. I put a link in the resources to something called The Black Dog. It's a gorgeous video that if anybody you love, The Black Dog, I call depression, I think. And it's, if you know anybody or you have ever experienced depression yourself, it's just so beautifully depicted in this cartoon about, having this very heavy sense that comes and just sort of pushes its way into your life. Okay. And this is true of anxiety and depression. It pushes its way into your life and you don't fucking want it there. Right. And it becomes really difficult to sort of figure out what to do with it. Okay. And so then it tends to perpetuate itself because we don't want it there so bad. So we try to push it out. And then of course, what happens when you do that. So major clinical depression, I think that, there's lots of, this just becomes so pervasive and all encompassing. Secondary, when I was in grad school, we call this dysthymia, but it's now referred to as persistent depressive disorder. And there's an interesting conversation around dysthymia or persistent depressive disorder, which is really, it's a low grade depression. And oftentimes people wonder about its connection to a personality disorder because there is just sort of a way of seeing the world, sort of Eeyore-ish, that becomes sort of a part of who we are, right? And dysthymia tends to be less responsive to medication, which is why, there's some in the data, some conversation around the difference between, a major clinical depression, which is just so debilitating and lots of neurochemicals involved, that when we can sort of be on board to do some therapy and really control the neurotransmitters to the best of a psychiatric response, then you can function quite beautifully. Dysthymia is a bit more of a low grade, and it seems to be a bit trickier to handle with depression or with medication specifically. But again, can we look at why this sort of view of the world has really set in? What is your story? The third thing I want to talk about in this world of depression is bipolar disorder 1 and 2. Now it is interesting because it doesn't fit into the DSM, specifically into let me just clarify, the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders, and it is sort of the clinical Bible for psychiatrists, psychologists, clinical social workers, physicians, when we're going to make a clinical diagnosis, not just a colloquial term around anxiety or depression.
The chat works if people want to refresh.
Oh, okay. The chat works, PS, if you just want to refresh your screen. So you go ahead and do that if you want. I'm going to do that too so I can see your chats. Yeah, now we got it. Hi, Melissa and Kelly. So I can see your chat. So you just tell me how we're doing so far. Okay. If you're enjoying this, if things are going well, I would love to know it. So back to this idea of bipolar. So we talked about major clinical depression. We talked about persistent depressive disorder, which is dysthymia. Bipolar disorder does not fit in the DSM under the chapter around depression specifically. It is now in the DSM-5, the most recent version of this Bible of disorders. It is really much more, it's its own chapter between depressive disorders and schizophrenia spectrum disorders, okay? So there's been lots of colloquial discussions around this idea of, you know, she's got the bipolar, does this kid have the bipolar, what is happening with the bipolar? And I just want to give you, I think, just a really clear sense around bipolar disorder, because I think we refer to it all the time. I have seen in my career maybe 5 people where unequivocally a disorder or a diagnosis of bipolar disorder was evident. It is much more rare than we tend to think about it. And the separation between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, historically, we've thought bipolar 1 is worse. It's not. But there's usually a manic episode that comes first, followed by a depressive episode. But bipolar 2 is one major depressive episode and then some hypomania. So there tends to be much more manic. So really out of control response to the world. So getting up and baking in the middle of the night, massive amounts of spending, excessive amounts of any end of the spectrum of behavior, drinking, smoking, sexual activity, all over the place, and really quick, rapid thinking. When you see somebody in a manic state, it can sometimes very easily border into psychosis, which is where we get into the delusional state of things. And again, I want to be so clear about this process of bipolar disorder. It's rare. And because people say, you know, it is this bounce between mood lability, you know, anxious and sad and up and down and up and down. My goodness, I want you to think about the lability in a true clinical bipolar disorder as like this. And sometimes that can go for long periods of time. So you can be depressed, and okay. So I think that, you know, that's the one that I really, I often love to talk about and clarify, because I think a lot of times people are concerned they got the bipolar. And I really, you know, being able to be clear in getting a diagnosis from a trained medical, clinical, psychiatric professional becomes very clear when we start throwing around those terms. And it's interesting because the 4th one I put on the list for today is the disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. This is a diagnosis most recently introduced. Yes, you can. Rayleigh, thank you. Can an individual experience a manic episode due to a life stressor and not be diagnosed with bipolar disorder? Yes. So a disruptive mood disorder, in the 90s, there was this massive rash, particularly when I was at the Children's Hospital, so I would argue even after the 90s, of diagnosing kids with bipolar disorder. So pediatric bipolar disorder became all of the rage, if you will, when I was at the Children's Hospital for 10 years. And it was so frustrating to me, because the job of children is to be really erratic in their mood. Sometimes checking where the edges are becomes really critical. And so we would either then see diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder or pediatric bipolar disorder. And in a response to that, the DSM-5 in the most recent iteration came up with this thing called disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. So if you have a child that's been diagnosed with a DMDD, and this is only my own clinical opinion, I have such a concern about that it's very poor researched. And I always get so concerned when we start pathologizing kids, because there is, I would say 99% of the time, whenever I've done an assessment on a babe, there's always a reason for the symptom profile. And so I'm much more concerned about the context than giving that diagnosis. And it's like, you know, irritability, mood lability, temper tantrums, you know, to the extreme. Okay. And so many people who are struggling within a family systems story have babes that then struggle significantly too, right? We're a product of we're a barometer sort of our context. So I think I just wanted those sort of separations to be made. And I hope that's helpful to sort of explain the two of those things there. I'm going to just pop out of this for a minute. Stop sharing. There we go. Because I just hope that, that's a little bit helpful in this process. So you can imagine, I just wanted to mention really quick to a little bit around when is the time to either then get, seek help for yourself. Brenda Glass, can I talk a little bit more about bipolar 2? Yeah. So tends to be much more on the depressive side of things. And so the diagnostic criteria is around one major depressive episode and then a hypomanic response. So there's no massive mania that comes out of it. The diagnostic criteria between sort of a clinical depressive disorder, a major depressive episode, is sometimes, really psychiatrically important to pull those things apart. Do we really have a bipolar disorder on board? What does the hypomania phase look like? I think that, that's the intricacies of sort of getting those things sorted out are so critically important to have a psychiatrist on board. Okay. And Corey, I'm going to get to that in a second. The other thing that I think, so the question then becomes, when should you seek help? And I would say a couple of things. When there is a trauma history on board, I think that is so critically important to get an assessment around. So by a trained professional, oftentimes, if I were just to explain this, a physician, a general physician is somebody who is trained medically and they have an MD. A psychiatrist is somebody who's trained specifically, so they've had extra training in the world of psychological and psychiatric conditions. Oftentimes, getting a referral to a psychiatrist is necessary when mental health issues become much more increasingly clinical or debilitating. Okay, not everybody generally needs to see a psychiatrist. Oftentimes, a consultation with your family doctor around things like low mood and experiences of anxiety or depression, with respect to situational experiences, when they become significantly clinically debilitating, oftentimes your physician will refer to a psychiatrist. Okay, and they are the most trained when it comes to the neurochemistry, the medical model, the involvement of the potential for medication. As a psychologist, particularly a clinical psychologist, making a diagnosis is my job. And being able to put the context in order to sort of do a solid assessment, I think is the biggest thing we miss in our profession. I think oftentimes we're looking to treat before we assess. And I think that oftentimes you can imagine if you've experienced significant amounts of trauma, multiple generations of abuse, neglect, and trauma, what that does to your amygdala, what that does to your prefrontal cortex. And so oftentimes when we treat only with medication in that regard, or only in therapy in that regard, it becomes really difficult, because if your body is in this heightened state of awareness and we just simply remove the stressor, we take you out of that abusive situation, you're in a now healthy relationship. We have decided that, we can debunk all of the irrational thinking. What we need then is the body keeps the score. So there's a big difference between a removal of the stressor and the stress response. This is true in trauma-related responses like PTSD. Okay, and we didn't speak specifically about PTSD because I'm gonna do that on a much different talk, because I really wanted to separate that. PTSD for me is much more of a psychological injury than sometimes the genetic components, the neurophysiological components of clinical anxiety or depression. Okay. What I think is really interesting about seeking help is, again, when this becomes debilitating, significantly disrupts your daily functioning and your relationships. There's also a massive connection between emotional health and physical health, as you know. And so oftentimes we try to separate the two, but undoubtedly, once your mental health starts to go, your physical body either follows or happens coincidentally. The second you stop sleeping, your ability to function well is significantly compromised. The second you stop eating well, and if we see this in, major clinical depression and major anxiety disorders, you can't eat. You physically can, but there's just no way. The nausea is there. The inability to sort of keep anything down, you can't navigate. That really affects the way that your body functions and shows up, right? When sleep becomes an issue, either you can't get out of bed or you can't get enough of it. Your physical body follows in this way. And so we'll really notice in the more clinical realm of things that the physical body then also struggles significantly, okay? So I think that is just, you can imagine that if I wanted to take this even into the little bit more of a severe end of things, when we're talking about then suicidal ideation or behavior, I wanted just to touch on suicide a little bit. Because you can imagine when you show up in this world where there is such a stigma around mental health. Are you crazy? Are you losing your mind? Are you a lunatic? Historically, if we look how we, responded to people with mental illness, I mean, we chained them up. Certainly when I did my, I did a bit of a practicum in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, at one of the first psychiatric inpatient units. And still in the basement of the hospital when I was there were chains where they would chain people who were significantly psychiatrically debilitated because it was scary. We didn't know what was wrong. There was nothing physically that we could talk about because it was happening from a neurophysiological perspective. And that stigma is still very much alive. If you have to take medication for diabetes, people are all in. If you have to take medication for anxiety and depression, nobody can talk about it. You got the PTSD, I don't got the PTSD. We refer to things colloquially as our crazy pills or the things that, we need to sort of keep us on track. And here's the thing, your inability to regulate insulin in your body is just the same as your inability to regulate your serotonin or your dopamine, okay? We are now at a place to be able to assist in regulating from a therapeutic perspective, from a medication perspective, to be able to sort of regulate emotion. And so I will fight for this for the ends of my days about, is it okay if I do a medication consult for my kid? Is it okay if I do? I don't would you do a medication consult with your kid if he's got 87,000 diabetes insulin things? Can you tell I'm not an MD? Yes, we would, without a question. There's no stigma around that. I want the best for my kid. We would do the research around whether this would be helpful or not. And what are the long-term benefits? What are the long-term concerns? Is there any data around this? Which is what you should do anytime you want to step into anybody, anything that you're going to put into your body. Make sure you do the research in that way. But this is so frustrating to me sometimes, right? Because we don't want anybody to know we're going to therapy. We don't want to talk about it. We're embarrassed by it. And I don't mean to shame anybody who feels that way, because I'm among you. I just think that the way that we continue to sort of work through this is we shine more light on it, which is hence the reason for this workshop. Okay. Now, why I want to sort of get to this place of suicide is, you can imagine, the more debilitating anxiety and depression come, if you have really ruminating, bizarre thoughts, if you have things that will just not be, am I a sexual predator? Am I going to kill my kids? Am I going to drop my baby? All of those things are in the realm of possibility about what your brain can make you think you are, or you might be, or you might become. Are you? And it becomes very difficult, right, to sort of have that conversation around the water cooler, because people are like, what the shit? And so when we can engage in this process, so much about it is naming it to tame it. Let's put it into context, right? I'm so worried to tell you that I think my kids will be better off without me. I'm so worried to tell you that I don't think I can hang on to my baby. What if I oftentimes kids, adolescents think about this in church, religious beliefs. What if I, struggle significantly with my sexual identity? Does that make me bad? And we've often told adolescents, kids, people that is bad if you think in a certain way. You can imagine the angst that happens in a body, okay? And then you have nowhere to put it. And then what happens is you start to internalize it into this place of, I'm bad, I'm useless, holy fuck, people be better off without me. Okay, so then oftentimes you can understand this idea of suicidal ideation becomes very tangible to escape from this completely debilitating experience. Okay, so suicidal thoughts are not uncommon. And we're so scared so often to name them, because then what do we have to do about it? Oh my God, did it get here? Did it get here? Did it get here? And people are often scared to name that in session with me, because do I then need to act on that, right? And part of a clinical judgment is around, whether this is something that is a possibility, or whether this is something in this way that is, going to cause there. But anyway, second leading cause of death, 10 to 34. Highest leading cause of highest rate of suicide in our country, if you're in Canada, and in North America, I believe this to be true, but we might have fact checked that, is middle-aged men. And I like to sort of connect this to the idea that if you have nowhere to put it, it'll eat you from the inside out. Okay. So that is sort of the range of the clinical experience. And now I want to talk a little bit about what we do about it. What are some of these strategies? What are some of the interventions? I love how do you participate or contribute to a partner's mental illness when they're spiraling, knowing when to pivot from creating space and not fixing to needing possibly insert help. Okay, so let's go into that. Thank you so much. Who was that? Jeremy Allen, thank you so much. Oh, of course you are. Okay, so number one, I think the first thing I'm going to say out of the gate is this is going to be the hardest thing to do sometimes, because when the people we love the most are losing their fucking minds, we just want to get it better. But I want to tell you this, take them at their word. We don't want our people to be feeling like they want to leave this earth. We don't want our people to be feeling incompetent or unreal. And I think oftentimes about the friends that I've sat with, on a floor, people that I desperately love, who are struggling with mental health issues, and I just want to fix it. But you're not this, you are a good mom. You are, of course, like that is the intention. And when they start to say things, I feel like such a burden to you, and you're like, okay, snap out of it. If at all possible, the acknowledgement is the thing, right? Take them at their word. I don't want to live. I don't want to be here. Oftentimes, if it's kids will be much more dramatic in this place, like this is it, I'm going to kill myself, I'm out of here. Oftentimes, those things are indications that obviously something's not going okay. I want to know what that is, right? Unpacking that becomes really important. Also, pay attention to the more subtle language and behavior. Sometimes these are the things that concern me a bit more. I just want the pain to stop. I don't know if I can go on. I feel like I'm a burden to people. Oftentimes, one of the biggest quintessential things, if you've taken any suicidal or any sort of help or training in this way, it's like watch when people are giving away prized possessions, when they are sort of planning to exit. Some of those things, can make us exhausted with our people, because we're like, oh my gosh, come on. But seriously, truly, take them at their word. Now, people will say this to me all the time. Oh my God, but this is exhausted. She talks about this all the time, or he keeps getting back here. They keep getting back there. I will tell you that the third thing becomes really important. Ask them directly. Don't guess, right? Are you thinking about ending your life? Does the world really feel too much right now? I don't want that to happen. Tell me, do you feel like hurting yourself? Do you have a plan? Is there something I should know about, right? And the response to that becomes really interesting, right? And here's the thing, we don't ask the question because we don't want the answer. Okay, most of the time. But I will tell you, here's your full stop response to that. If it is, yes, I'm out. I have a plan. I have nothing left. I'm done today. I have a weapon, I have medication, I have whatever the deal is, all bets are off, straight to 911. The beautiful thing in our country is that we have access immediately to people who can do, if nothing else, keep people safe. There's an ability in that moment anyways. And I could talk for days about how broken the system is, how unfair and unprepared oftentimes our first responders or our police officers are, how we don't really, talk about the support in that way. But I will tell you, as a human who loves somebody, if you ask the question and you get the response, 911 is the deal. Call in your people, call somebody else who can assist you in that process. Rarely can we do this alone. And families tend to be very secretive about people who struggle significantly with mental health issues, okay? I don't know, so hear me when I say this. This is not something that we typically yell from the rooftops. Oh my God, mom's nuts or dad's losing his mind. Like, being able to have a trusted group of people who that individual trusts is necessary as you build your village, because walking somebody through a clinical diagnosis can be excruciatingly exhausting. And I mean this with all due respect, because I feel like I've been on both sides of this as a patient, and certainly as a clinician, as a friend, as a partner. When we get to those places for our people, oftentimes they don't want anybody to know about it. And it becomes a dance in how we build the village about the safe people who can be checking in on, stopping by, visiting, connecting. Okay, that's like probably my number one response to this is, how do we get into this place of being able to sort of not be the sole one responsible for somebody, right? And if they don't want anybody to know, having that conversation about, I'm going to have to, making the decision within your own system about whether betraying trust in a moment in a safe way versus risking them not being okay. That's the choices so many of us have to make sometimes, okay? The fourth thing, again, around making a plan, so naming it to tame it, right? There'll be moments where it will get worse than others and people will be like, I'm so done. Yeah, it is exhausting. I hear you, Michelle. Because oftentimes that's such a good point, Michelle, is that we are triggered in and of ourselves, right? Because all of us have our own stories. And if it's people we love, we're often our chapters overwhelmed, right? We often interact with things and they're like, dad was such a dink and like he was abusive and now like I'm, and you're like, fuck, I know, me too. And you know what? Or something happened to you in the family system and you didn't experience that. Or as a husband and a wife, your partner is always the one that's like bringing you down and sad. And you're the one that's always picking them up. It becomes so hard to do that. And so I think, what is the plan? Who are the trusted people that can support us in that way? When, not if, we get up against that sort of rush of serotonin, that rush of a neurotransmitter, when we go through that cycle, when we hit a bad spot, what's our plan? It is best to sort of start to have those conversations on the good days, not when you're on the floor in a pool of snot, okay? 5, I want to give you some specific strategies around grounding in the moment. If you are having a conversation with somebody who is absolutely debilitated, and I can give you a multitude of examples around this, with people, with my own son, with the people I love the most in my world. It is so scary because you just want to get them out of it. But here's a couple of things that I need you to know from a neurophysiological perspective. What's happening in those states of panic, when thoughts are not clear, when you can't even articulate things, if you can't produce language, you're having trouble processing it. So part of our job, typically speaking, if you're verbal, part of our job is to stop talking and get them back in their body, okay? Number one rule in the most debilitating, panicky kind of fight or flight states, okay? Here's sort of 4 things that I do all the time. Number 1, moving their body. If I have somebody who's in the middle of a panic attack, what I want to be able to do is say, okay, look at me, rock, wiggle your toes. If you can get up with me, this is going to sound ridiculous, do a jumping jack. Let's do 5, okay? Come on, 5 jumping jacks, 5 push-ups. Okay. Really weird, but if I can get you to laugh, if I can get you back into your body, right, then you're going to do it. If you can't physically move, I'm going to give you something that will be a comfort item, something that can bring you back to a sense of connection. Okay. And so this often happens in also if I'm separating from somebody, if I know they're going to have a really hard time, if they're having a sleepover, this is, all the range of anxiety here. But if they're, separation is an issue, or, I'm going to be away from my partner and that really struggles. Sometimes it's just like a stone that you and I both have. It's a t-shirt. It's something that reminds me of that person to help regulate my external system. The other things that I have, if I can't get up or move a body, which is many, many times, laying in, beside somebody on the floor, in a bed with a kid, any of those things, we'll just do some activities that will get the brain back on track. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a really good thing. 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you smell, 2 things you taste, and 1 thing you want to be. So let's go back. You can do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 around anything, but 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I try to get the senses involved. So tell me right now, what are 5 things you see? I don't know what you're talking about. Just look around this room right now. What are 5 things you see? I see a pillow. I see Marty. I see a mini egg. What often happens in that process is you start to bring the attention back to the moment. Okay. So if the thing is too big, then okay, then good. You did good. We got 5. What's 4 things you smell? I don't know. 4 things. We had Indian food. I can smell the spices. I think this carpet is old. There's so much shit has happened in this hotel room that I don't even want to know about. Okay. But you can see then when I bring it back into the moment, what happens is sometimes there's some joy that is infused in there. And what that's doing is bringing back the prefrontal cortex. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The other thing Astra and I use quite often, kids and anxiety, this works really well. Actually, this works with many people with anxiety, is CALM. CALM. Pick a category and go through CALM again and again and again and again and again. CALM, animals. C, give me an animal that starts with C. Give me an animal that starts with A. Give me an animal that starts with L. Give me an animal that starts with M, and do it again. You can't have the same animals. If you run out of animals, you switch to chocolate bars. If you run out of chocolate bars, okay. So again, the intention behind all of this stuff is to, how do I get you back physically in your body, just in that moment, to sort of move you through a debilitating moment, whether you're sort of, somewhere that you can't then, physically move off of a subway or out of a room, or, I need to get you active a little bit. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then the other thing that I use quite often is music, particularly with people who struggle, older people. If you're sort of trying to get somebody back in a really calm state that just struggles with like any of these concepts, knowing a favorite song, a favorite genre of music sometimes can really sort of get that prefrontal cortex back on, put it in a state of sort of lowering that arousal. Okay, so that is, I think, a few of the things specifically around grounding. And then I just wanted to comment just real briefly around sort of a medication consult. Again, I think I talked about this already. This is not my realm. So physician, psychiatrist, I always want you to go there first. I often in my clinical practice will work in consultation with a physician or a psychiatrist, sharing my observations about what happens in my office that sometimes they don't get enough context for. So that can be really helpful in deciding whether, your child needs a medication consult, or whether, your partner, or whatever that looks like. You as a support person will often be a much better barometer of whether meds are working or if there's a need for a tweak in medication. So having that conversation, having an open conversation or a dialogue with your partner, your kid, your friend's psychiatrist, if that's possible. Consent is always needed, obviously, but sometimes it really takes that team approach, particularly when we get into a psychiatric place where our ability to reflect on our own being becomes compromised. So having that sort of village to be able to do that becomes really helpful. And then the other thing I think is really critical is seeking resources together. And so we often try to isolate this, like you go find help, you go get your help, you go, you need help. We say that all the time. Fuck it. Like Okay. And what I think is really critical, important about that is if you can do that together as a couple, as a best friend, as a support person, whatever that looks like, then the two of you start to use the strategies. I always, if it's possible, invite a partner into a session when if we got some PTSD on board, if there's some significant debilitating anxiety, having somebody else just sort of listen to the way that we operate. And of course, with kids, right? We go through a toolbox or a strategy, or here's what I do when teaching people, big people, how to help little people do that in the moment. Often is what is most critically important, right? If we've done a solid assessment, then it's really about, okay, so where's this coming from? But then what we do about it in the moment typically doesn't happen in, once a week in therapy. You need those strategies or those skills to get grounded, usually at bedtime or, transitions to school, that kind of thing. Okay. And then the other thing I just wanted to add, if you are struggling, in addition to sort of those grounding exercises, I did put a little resource in here around journaling. Oftentimes, if you're concerned about sharing thoughts with other people, putting it anywhere else, what are people going to think of me when? Journaling becomes, there's such a and I'm terrible at it, okay? But there's such a data source base around this idea of writing it down. If you can't give it to somebody else, write it, draw it, get it somewhere else out, draw what it feels like. Oftentimes this happens in therapy. Sometimes this happens in therapy. Always, I'll just be like, name it. Tell me what it looks like. What is the picture in your head? Like, okay, I feel it. Where do you feel it? In my chest. Okay, so give me an image of it. And if you can draw that image, is sometimes that externalization allows us to sort of then help fight the anxiety, the depression, the thing that's sort of pushing into your family system, sitting at your dinner table. I mean, it's really an asshole. And so how do we figure out why it's there and what we do about it becomes really critically important, particularly with a kid. And Carrie, I really like this question. How do you get someone to talk? My 19-year-old often puts up walls and just won't talk. You're likely not the best person for your 19-year-old to have a conversation with. And I mean that with all the love in my heart. What I want you to know is that, first of all, as a parent, timing is everything. Best times to have conversations about big emotions are bedtime, which makes it really tricky if your 19-year-old doesn't live with you. But secondly, don't underestimate that, right? Stopping in, checking. If not, the secondary thing for me is to build that village. Who is your best friend? Do they have a relationship with your kid? Grandma, auntie, cookum, Marty. Is there anybody in the world, the favorite teacher, the hockey coach, who you could pull in to say, I'm really worried about Zach? And I know as a mom, I often get worried about these things. I'm just wondering, can you take him for a coffee? Is there a Slurpee? Is there, something, a Slurpee run that we can do? I think that becomes really critical. So what to do, the best way to get in a good assessment on a 12-year-old, getting an assessment is the first stop, for sure. Start with a family physician if that's easier. Get some recommendations by trusted professionals around psychologists or clinical social workers that can get the story. Typically what I want you to be able to be doing is getting a story. I want your clinician, whoever that is, to be asking about mom, dad, siblings, what the dynamic is like in the system, what their experiences have been like, how they doing at school, what their friends look like. Really give me a sense about who this babe is, right? And how they show up in the world. Who do they see themselves as? Can they draw themselves from me? All of those things are so critically important in sort of gaining that insight. All right. And so then the thing that I would like to just sort of also talk about is just in terms of how debilitating it can be to sort of walk people through clinical disorders. And I want to tell you, you cannot do this alone, okay? And the thing that breaks my heart the most around this world of mental health work is that sometimes, no matter, even if we do all the things right, we don't get it. We miss it. We lose the people we love to suicide. We lose the people we love to addiction or mental health issues. And here's the grace that I really want to offer to you in this place. I mean, as a professional, there's been a number of situations where, you know, in retrospect, I would look back and think about all the things I could have, should have done for a particular patient. But sometimes even when we get all of the resources in place, all of the consults in place, mental health issues are fucking powerful. And if there is an intent, sometimes it becomes really difficult, even if you are on a locked unit, to keep the people we love safe. And I just want you to know that finding a community of people, finding a good network where you can lean on and consult about and have conversations with, and not be the sole one who always has to walk these, the people you love home, becomes really, really helpful in this process, because it is, it's exhausting, and it's because we love so deeply, you know, because we love so deeply and we don't want our people to hurt. Okay. So I'm going to end, I think, a little bit with, before we jump into questions, because I see we have just probably about 15 minutes left to sort of answer some of those questions. I had a little bit more. Okay, so what I wanted to also show you then is, you know, those were the sort of the interesting things around that. The one thing I want to just be very clear about, and I talk about this in Feeling Seen, and I mean, of course, I'm always going to talk about my new book, but this isn't necessarily a plug for it, but I got to tell you just how critically important it is to then have a plan for when we lose our way again. Because I think what happens so often is when we get somebody through an episode or an experience or a down, we hold our breath and hope it's not going to happen again. That's such bullshit, see, because it's gonna. And it, not always, but typically what happens is when we have a response to things that involve, you know, an anxious presentation, a depressive response, a panic experience, it's okay if those things come again. What becomes really critical is our ability to understand that we are skilled to handle it, that we have people and resources and things in place that no matter what, bring it. We got it. Okay? We got it. And I think that ability to drop our shoulders becomes critical. And so in Feeling Seen, the whole third part of the book is what happens when we lose our way again. And I mean, I just wanted to touch on these things briefly, but these are the reconnection practices that I have to do in my own place if I'm going to be helpful to my friends, to my own mental health, to my kids' mental health, to my partner's mental health. Those are the things that I have to do. If I'm not okay, the people I love, lead, serve, show up for are not okay because I'm not. And so the number one factor is we are such barometers to other people's emotions and feelings. And so we got to look after you. So you investing in a night like this with me and with us is amazing. Thank you for this. You are incredible because of that. And so much of it is, how do we hang on to our people? Who are the ones that keep you in the game? When you start to worry really about your spouse, when you start to worry really about your kid, who is your trusted crew that you are bouncing those things off of, right? We're in this place right now where everybody seems to be in a heightened state of arousal. Uncertainty, fear, no end in sight. I mean, those are the three critical components. And I mean, we've just all navigated this fucking pandy, which uncertainty, fear, no end in sight are the three ingredients of a global pandemic. Also the three ingredients of the most dysregulated amongst us. The key ingredients to a mental health crisis is uncertainty, fear, no end in sight. And as a globe, we've just lived that. So let's give ourselves some grace, okay? Number one, getting back to your people, okay? I want you to think about who your people are, who regulate you, who with a phone call, a picture, a prayer, a text, whatever that is, can bring you back into your body. Because secondly, your breath is something, before you make any major decision about somebody you really love and you want to assist, is I want to get you back into that place of emotional regulation. And I take you through this in the book, but I'll take you through it now. Right now, whatever you're doing, drop your shoulders. You're going to be thinking about people and what you should or could or maybe didn't do, maybe your own self, what that looks like, how overwhelming this world might feel right now. Number one, you're not alone. Number two, you're the best, having the best access to the best parts of yourself happens in a regulated body. So drop your shoulders, wiggle your jaw, drop your tongue from the roof of your mouth. Drop your shoulders again, wiggle your toes, smile, and let your gut out. See, that's a relaxed body. When you get back into your breath, you cannot be emotionally dysregulated with and breathe deeply. And so much about getting the body back in, some of those strategies that I gave you before is really, really critical to do for ourselves, particularly when we love somebody who's struggling significantly with mental health issues, okay? And the third thing that I talk about the book is really like, listen, you guys, we're just here walking each other home. I have not met a single person in my lifetime that has not struggled with something emotionally related. Burnout, overwhelmed, angst, depressive symptoms, lack of sleep, periods of time where they've had a big gut punching loss. We are all so way more alike than we are different. And then when the people we love or ourselves sort of experience those extreme ends of emotional debilitation, like a clinical anxiety or a clinical depression, the thing we need the most is each other. And it tends to be the things that we pull away from the most. So never, ever underestimate your power, right? Of stepping in, of building the people, of talking to people, of bouncing off ideas, of stopping by with a note, a casserole. If they don't answer the door, leave it on the doorstep, do the text, do the call. It's not your job to fix it. You're not that good. But our relentless pursuit of connection is the only way, home. It's the only way home. Okay, friends. So that was a good time. It's 9:44. I want to just leave you with a couple of things, okay? And then we're going to jump into questions. But I'm going to just pop out of here right now. And just so that I can see your faces, I'll hopefully see your faces a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to just go through some of the questions that we have, but if you have anything you want me, tell me what stuck out significantly for you tonight in the chat. I would really love that. I have Rayleigh says, my person doesn't have a village and I live far away, so I don't know how to help build that village. How do I gently share with her that I can't be the only one? I don't want to hurt her, but I also need to protect my own mental health. I can't do that alone. Okay, beautiful question. I think so much of this, is really, I hear this so often when, people just say, I feel solely responsible for. And I think it's about really bringing that into the room. Not in the middle of a thing, but if you can help it, but having that really clear conversation when either you can jump on a FaceTime, you can see each other's eyes, you can have coffee at the same time, and you can be able to say things like, I want to make sure you have other people to lean on. Because what I lose sleep over is if I can't be available. What I lose sleep over is I want to be your person and I want you to be my person, but we got to figure out how else we build that in. And sometimes it's just those conversations, and those conversations scare us so much, so then we just sort of start to ignore or isolate or pull away. So that would be the thing that I think about the most, is really, we're so scared to have conversations in this place, but we have to. Because if we don't, clear is kind. And resentment starts to set in if you start to see the number and you're like, oh shit. Or if you start to be like, I'm not enough, I don't think I can be helpful. Those are the times probably to start to have those conversations, okay? Because they'll feel it as well, okay? Let me see. We are noticing that everyone seems to be struggling, not clinical or requiring a diagnosis, but just in general having a tough time. How do we, HR, friends, family, help, support? Oh my God. I love that question. It is the relentless pursuit, okay? The only way I can continue to serve in this way is to be able to look after myself. And some days is fucking terrible, okay? Some days there's no, I'm out. And so much about that is you can't give away something you never received. You also can't give away something if your tank is empty. This is a conversation around burnout. Okay, so Freudenberger came up with this concept of burnout in 1974, and basically it was based on some work that he did back then with people who in the world of drug addiction. And a colloquial term for people who have used extensively to the point of sort of dulling their light is burnouts. And so he coined that term in the world of the workplace. And essentially what it means is that when the resources outside of the things you do to serve or to work every single day to fill you up, those fill up resources are not enough, then the ones that get sucked from you, you will get burnt out. But here's the thing I love about the burnout nature of this world right now. by virtue of being burnt out, it is indicative of the fact that at one point there was a flame. I have hope in that, because if we don't burn out, we've just always been assholes and we've always hated each other, right? But if we're in this state of like, I'm missing my spark, my desire to serve the world, my relationship, the smile on his face, it tells me that it was there once. It tells me that there is hope in that way to get back to that place. Okay. All right. So Michelle, how do we support ourselves so that we can be there for others? Okay. First of all bets are off. Number one, this is going to be the 101. You hate this. You're going to hate this answer because I hate this answer. Are you drinking enough water? Okay. This is the thing. I learned this week. I'm perpetually dehydrated, apparently. And you cannot be a good server if you don't look after this way, walker. Okay. If you don't do this, the most significant contributing factor to being able to serve other people is your social relationships. Okay. That actually trumps exercise and eating well. Are you getting fueled up in your world? Who are your people? And you're like, I don't have any people. Listen, here's what's interesting. I want you to think about connections online to people. And I don't mean like online dating sites. I mean like groups that sort of support people in your way so you don't feel alone. The universe, praying to people that you love. I think being a social somewhere to put sort of your stuff matters so significantly. Then, of course, drinking water, moving your body, getting outside, doing those things that sort of regulate your system, because you have access to everything you need in this moment. You have the ability to sort of be the best you can. The issue is we often lose access. Okay. I was struck by PTSD being a psychological injury that is different from depression and anxiety. I'm trying to support a spouse suffering from PTSD that I thought was anxiety and depression because it often shows up in the way in behaviors, thoughts, actions, and decision-making capacity. Patty! It's my favorite thing to talk about in trauma. PTSD is a psychological injury. And much like a physical injury, if it is dealt with and assessed and worked through sooner rather than later, the responsiveness is so much greater. But here's the interesting thing about a psychological injury. Typically what happens in trauma is, just like in anxiety, we flip our lid out of the way, okay? And we're supposed to do that. So if we've experienced something that has been traumatic, something we've been coded in terror, either we've served as a first responder, or we've been in an abusive situation, or we've been attacked by a tiger, okay? The brain responds very similar in each of those situations because it flips your prefrontal cortex out of the way. The trick, oftentimes, with a trauma response is that if there's nobody there to help reintegrate that experience, to be able to process that experience, to name it, to sort of put it back into context, it will continue to eat you from the inside out. The sights, the smells, the sounds will come back in flashbacks, in body experiences, and all of those things, particularly if you've been doing this for a very long career. Those things happen. Often then we get this diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder because we are, as a result of experiencing either multiple traumas or significant, chronic history or one big massive event, we're stuck in that space. The response always is to how do we process that? How do we either regulate the body temporarily or sometimes lifelong with a medication response so that then we can do the work? But typically both of those things have to happen in tandem. Not only just a medication response, but also a sort of negotiating of the fact that you are out of that heightened state of arousal now. You are no longer at the scene. And so when you smell gasoline, despite the fact that it takes you right back there, you are not. How can we tell our body about that? Okay, because the body keeps the score. Okay. Okay, do you? Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. Thank you. Marty's got some questions. Hi, Jody. If your child has experienced trauma in several ways, also has been diagnosed with ADHD prior as a younger child, can they then develop anxiety, depression later as a teen due to those experiences that weren't able to regulate the body? Listen, I don't know about the specific case at all. Obviously, what I would really suggest is that for sure, when our bodies have been in a heightened state of arousal, if we have anxiety, and there's often lots of conversations around getting a really accurate diagnosis of ADHD too, because I want there to be a thorough assessment and observation by school and observation at home, and sometimes a self-reporting if that can happen, because in the state of ADHD, sometimes it becomes really difficult to sort of differentiate that between anxiety and a hyperaroused system. But if kids have experienced trauma in any way, what becomes really critical is really getting that into context and understanding the village, creating a sense of safety around that kid so we can walk through that heightened state of arousal. Okay, that's kind of a vague answer, but I hope that's helpful. Is there a way to decide if a residential program is needed? Where can you get information about what places are available? You know, my biggest recommendation, depending on where you are on this planet, is really do some good research. Take a look at, you know, people who have, I mean, our access to Google right now really makes some of those things interesting. I don't know that there's any that I would recommend because I haven't, you know, specifically residential programs are so universal, whether there's an addiction issue or a trauma issue, but be very careful in seeking resources in that way, because I want to make sure that you vetted them well. Because sometimes there's an intent, particularly by people who have experienced their own trauma, to serve other people in that regard. And those can be great, but sometimes that can be even more brutal. So I want you to make sure that you really trust this place that you're going to. Talk to your physician about it, talk to your psychologist about it, see if there's any local recommendations, any feedback from people who have attended previously. I think that's important. So Christy, I love this question. Does genetics play a role in people being at higher risk of getting depression and anxiety? Absolutely. It's a genetically loaded condition. Bipolar in particular is one of the most strongly loaded genetic conditions, that and ADHD, interestingly. So it's really important to do a family history when we're talking about those things. Once you've been diagnosed with anxiety, will you need meds for the rest of your life? Such a great question that people ask all the time. It is so situation dependent. Again, in consultation with the people you're working with, you know, your physician, your psychiatrist, your social worker. For some people, absolutely, there's not a question. After, you know, an experience of postpartum, sometimes there's a change in the neurochemistry that just will be that way. Or sometimes for people, it is like, it doesn't make any sense to go off. The more clinically debilitating the symptoms become, sometimes that's indicative of, you know, needing it longer term versus a situational experience. But again, I think it's like, if it's working, it's okay, right? But having that consultation or that conversation with a physician or your psychiatrist is super important. When you struggle with anxiety, depression before, and life hands you some tough punches, and you feel like you might slip into the dark place again, is it time to reach out for help before we slide too far again? Yes! I cannot say that equivocally enough. Hey, Marty, wouldn't you say like that is the most critical thing? The hard part about this is that sometimes we don't know when we're sliding. Sometimes we think we're fine. And I cannot tell you how many times people get on a medication regime and start to feel better. And so they stop fucking taking their medication without consultation with a physician. Don't! That is the point. Medication is supposed to make you feel better, and you don't get into that place and you've done the therapy and you're like, fuck, I'm good. You do that in consultation with other people, please. Okay? Because you are not the best judge sometimes of what that means for you. Okay, so that would be my feedback. Can you connect to the environments outside of suicide? Can you connect that to environments outside of suicide? We notice a bad day turned into a bad week, and energy levels and emotional responses are at a high level of intensity. Yeah, I think it's like really this place of the spirally nature of emotional dysregulation that can sometimes happen, that if you can have your people, if you can journal, if you can pay attention to times of year and situations and, you know, issues that you know will be difficult for you to navigate or the people you love to navigate, always so helpful to just be more aware of the contexts and have people who can give you those feedbacks. I think that's really critical. Okay, Sonia, what happens when one parent caused the trauma and told the child that her one-safe person was a liar and untrustworthy? Oh, mama. So the child, will that child ever understand the safe parent is really the safe place? Oh my gosh. So Sonia, thank you so much for that question. I think so often, early in my career, I got to do a lot of work in contentious divorce. And I loved it so much because there are two very, very hurt people who tend to hurt people. And when there is some littles caught in the middle with not a very big brain to make sense of it, oftentimes what's so critically helpful is being able to have somewhere to put that after the big emotion has either passed, or if you're still in the middle of it, that's okay too. Some of the best work that I find, if you can find somebody who is really astute in family systems work, emotion focused therapy for families. I put some of those links in the resources around, somebody who has a trauma background. I'm a huge fan of EMDR. Therapists who are trained in that way really might be able to sort of assist the redevelopment of that relationship, because oftentimes it is the telling and the retelling of the stories and the time at which we made decisions in our respective relationships with people that sometimes can't be done alone. So I think that it's about the rebuilding of the relationship between the child and the mom. Not necessarily, the two adults, if we have proven that to be something that can't happen. And in the meantime, we just do the best we can with what we got. It is that, relentless pursuit of connection that sometimes requires a break, sometimes requires a stepping back, but, every situation is different. I think what is so critically important is we show up for each other to the best that we can, that where it's protective enough around our own mental health that we can stay safe in that way, because nobody matters more than you. I promise you. What do I think of PCPs prescribing lifelong anxiety and depression medication? PCPs, tell me about that. Give me that definition. PCPs, Angela. I want to make sure primary care physicians. Give me that response there. And then I'll help you with that one. Session specifically to bipolar and ADHD would be really good. Okay, Karen, stay tuned. We'll do that. It is sad and frustrating when all the resources and professionals, it kept going up, sorry, are involved and the person continues to have physical episodes that are unfounded and undiagnosed. I know. So a primary care physician. Okay, sorry, Angela, that's what I thought it was. What do you think of primary care physicians prescribing lifelong anxiety and depression medication? My gosh, what I think is I've met some of the most incredible primary care physicians on the planet who are very well versed and educated, and sometimes the only resources we got. I think the very astute ones will do a consultation with a psychiatrist, particularly if there's been a long-standing issue in this way. And I think that that's what's really, really critically important is, being very specific about having good conversations with your care providers, being always an advocate for your own health and your own mental health, and having those conversations with your care providers. Really, it's necessary. I mean, I love those conversations, and I'm not always up for like, what did you, but always I would much rather people question, is this where we think we should go? What about this? Should we be doing more of this? It's your right. It's your absolute right. And, from a professional capacity, we're doing the best we can with what we got. And in an overwhelmed system, nobody should be overlooked. Okay. So, okay, friends, that was amazing. Thank you for sharing so many of your stories. And I see we're right at the time now. I wanted just to leave you with this. I'm going to leave you what's up next for our little team here. If you want to join us again, everybody's been sort of talking about, but we've asked about what is the next workshop. And so I'm going to talk specifically about girls in the next workshop, raising strong girls. So we're going to talk about building confident women. And I'm so happy to, we'll jump into this later in the year about our boys. As you may know this, I have 2 sons and a daughter. And I think it's very interesting right now, this time of stepping into a, how do we get into this place of raising daughters in a disconnected world. So that's coming up on March 6th, and every place where you found to connect here, that's where you buy the tickets. And we're going to do that again, 90 minutes. And you get that replay for 7 days, which is really what you get tonight too. So I wanted just to tell you that tickets, I think, are closed now for this event. But you now have access starting as soon as it's up. And so my team, the beautiful team of Des Malenka and Mike Tai from the Creative Hive are going to do their very best to pop this video up right away. And your rewatch of this happens at the start of as soon as it's up. So you get 7 days. So I hope you will keep it and just share it with the people who, invested in it. And I'm so happy that you're here tonight. And I hope to see you in one of our next workshops. And if there's any feedback, anything that you want me to do differently or better, or any of those things, certainly send a follow-up to welcome@drjodycarrington.com, and we will make sure that we get to all of those things. You'll also see a survey that comes out, I think tomorrow, to give us some feedback around anything that you want me to know about tonight. I would love to hear it. And yes, I will see so many of you in Saskatoon on the weekends. If not, thank you. Thank you for being here. You are so loved and so needed. And I am very grateful for you. Have a good night, everybody. Do I?